Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa and the Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, I can't hear you. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Now, before I introduce our distinguished speaker, I'd like to introduce our head table. Let me start with our officers, our conference Vice President, Philadelphia Mayor Michael Nutter. Second Vice President, Mesa Mayor Scott Smith. And we're very fortunate to have with us our past presidents, Burnsville Mayor Elizabeth Kautz, Boston Mayor Tom Menino, Akron Mayor Don Plasqualik, and the Dean of America's Mayors, Joe Riley of Charleston, South Carolina. Let me, of course, also acknowledge our host, our fabulous host, Orlando Mayor Buddy Dyer. And of course, our CEO and Executive Director, Tom Cochran. It's now my distinct honor and privilege to introduce Vice President Joe Biden. As mayors, we have few better friends and few stauncher allies than Vice President Biden. Throughout his decades-long career as an elected official and public servant, the Vice President has championed the issues that are critical to the prosperity and growth of America's cities. As a senator, he was instrumental in passing the crime bill, an historic piece of legislation that put more than 100,000 police officers on America's streets. One of the Vice President's signature legislative achievements, the Violence Against Women's Act, his commitment to public safety has continued as Vice President. Now, while some in Congress have sought to eliminate proven partnerships like the COPS program, the Vice President is never tired of reminding our congressional leaders of this simple fact. When our streets are safe, neighborhoods blossom. When our streets are safe, companies and businesses thrive and invest in our cities. When our streets are safe, jobs come to our cities. Vice President Biden has also played a key role in the White House to ensure that there will be a nationwide public safety communications network. Vice President Biden's support for America's cities goes well beyond public safety. He led the administration's implementation of the Recovery Act, which has provided critical resources for our communities. The Recovery Act saved and created millions of jobs, built infrastructure across the country, and helped the recession. And with his signature passion and gusto, Vice President Biden has stood with America's middle class and advocated for increased college affordability and the growth of jobs in the country's manufacturing sector. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Vice President Joe Biden.
Villaraigosa. Can you pronounce it? That's what he's telling me here. Antonio, good to be with you. Thank you for having me. I can see the look on some of your faces. Oh my God, Biden again. I talked to him for hours. Hours. You guys, you know, be careful what you wish for. You always said you wanted input, and I kept calling you all through that recovery, 117 of you, and they go, oh God, no, he's asking me again. Hey, before I begin, keep an eye on Scott for me, will you? I don't want to do anything to offend him. He's too damn big. Scott, I know you're a Republican, but you'll like me. I'm okay. I'm a good guy. You know what I mean? Just, you know, you shake his hand, you feel like you're putting your hand in a vice. I don't know. Maybe he just does that to Democrats. I don't know. But I want you on my team, you sucker. I tell you what, man. If I'm in a foxhole, I want that man with me, I tell you. Elizabeth, actually, all the people up here, I'd pick you first. I'm glad to be here with my mayor. This is my mayor. My mayor, the Philadelphia mayor. Philadelphia is the suburb of Wilmington, Delaware. I spend more of my life in Philly. My daughter lives in Philly. 2 of my kids went to school in Philly. My son-in-law is from Philly. And this has been one of my best friends ever in public life. It's great to see you. And Jojo, I think you're crazy. First of all, I think you're all crazy. Being a mayor, that's a real job, man. And they know where you live. But I've... And there's a big gate around the vice president's house. I never had that as a senator. I rode the train 7,900 times, round trip. But Joe, you've been a good friend for a long, long time. You do an amazing, amazing job. And and poor Don's had to put up with me in Akron. I've been hanging out there a little bit. You're coming back, buddy. Your whole state's coming back, and congratulations to you. Look, there's so many of you here. I think it's not arguable that you, among any group of elected officials, have seen up close and personal the incredible negative impact of this god-awful recession we inherited. All of us inherited, Democrats, Republicans, President, Congress, governors, mayors. We all, beginning in 2009, I'm not going to go about who's responsible, who's at fault, or why it happened, but the fact is, in 2009, when some of you were reelected in 8 and some of you were elected for the first time, it's like walking into a meat grinder. It was the most difficult economic crisis in America short of a depression, literally. Mr. Mayor, you may remember I was in the city with you, and right off the bat, I dubbed it the Great Recession. The press started, Biden's exaggerating again. We've noticed they all call it the Great Recession because it was the most devastating economic impact on America short of a depression. 9 million jobs lost. And you guys see firsthand what it means about that job loss. My grandpa, Finnegan from Scranton, he used to say, Joey, when the guy in Dunmore is out of work, it's an economic slowdown. When your brother-in-law is out of work, it's a recession. When you're out of work, it's a depression. It's a depression for 9 million, which really is more like 45 million family members. $17 trillion in wealth. Not moved, not reallocated, evaporated. Americans and folks in your city who you're desperately trying to keep in every city. What's the one thing, if you had a wish, what would you most want to grow in your city? Neighborhoods, middle-class families, people living in your city. They watched $17 trillion in wealth evaporate, disappear, equity in their homes, their 401ks collapsed. As I said yesterday, it's not merely the economic impact, but the psychological impact. this has on folks. Too many people made what Mayor Nutter's heard me say before, that I call the longest walk. A walk my dad made back when we lived in Scranton back in the mid-50s, and he had a job, but not a good job, not a job that was good enough to keep us together. I remember him walking up that short flight of stairs in my grandfather's house saying, "Joey, I'm going to move. Take about a year. I'll come home every weekend if I can." I remember it. I was going to the 3rd grade. I wasn't frightened. I was disappointed because my dad said, "It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. I'll come home almost every weekend." Think of the people you know. You run in every day in the streets of your city who made that walk, man. Honey, you can't go back to St. Paul's School. You can't go back to Cooper School. You can't sing in the choir. You can't play in that Little League team. Daddy, Mommy lost their job. Bank says, "We can't live here anymore, honey." You see it. You don't just read about it. You see it in people's eyes. A recent study by the Fed asserted, and there's other studies similar, that between 2007 and 2009, the median household wealth in America went from $126,400 to $77,000, a 40% drop. Staggering. And you've watched, you've seen, you've felt, more than any single group of elected officials, the incredible impact on the middle class and the devastating impact on the poorest of your cities. And you have the nation's poor huddled primarily in your cities. You knew and we knew in January of 2009 we had to act. Oh, I love going to the think tanks. I participate in those. I'm supposedly a foreign policy expert. It's a hell of a lot easier than being the mayor of a big city. All foreign policies is a logical extension of personal relationships, literally with less information to act on. But you have a lot of information, but not all the resources to act on the information you have. See, we knew we had to act. You knew we had to act. For all of you, having cops and firefighters in the street to protect and save lives, our homes, our businesses, it's not a luxury. It's an absolute necessity to run your cities. For all of you, Medicaid, not at Medicare, Medicaid, aid for the poor, the disabled, women and children. Tommy, for you up in Boston, that is not a luxury. That is an absolute necessity. No option. And in tough economic times, those rolls swell. And they haven't swollen this much in God knows when, putting incredible pressure on your hospitals, on your healthcare system. For all of you, having a business base in your cities, both commercial and retail, corporate headquarters, it's not a luxury. It's an absolute necessity to have a tax base upon which to deliver the services. Many of those services are people who do not live in your cities, but commute in and out and demand the same exact services as Americans have a right to. The citizens of your city do. For all of you, repairing a crumbling infrastructure is not a luxury. When that force main interceptor overflows because it's 65 years old, when that wastewater becomes sewer water and creates a health hazard in your cities. When that interchange that was supposed to come off of the interstate that cut through the heart of some of your cities or that bridge, the bridges, some 40% of which in some places are literally dangerous. That railroad overpass that Amtrak can't pay for. These aren't necessities. These aren't luxuries. They're absolutely essential elements if you've been able to retain a residential base in your city of people who are middle-class people who provide opportunity for people to aspire to the middle class. And the folks I might have to go out and buy all those products that the wealth makers make. How do you attract businesses? I used to be a county councilman. Not as hard as you have, but not an easy job. What's the first thing when they come in and want to talk to you about whether they're going to relocate in your city? What's your sewers like? What are the roads like? Is there a port? Does this port function well? How about the airport? I can't get onto the exchange. This railroad bed, it's not accessible for me. It's called infrastructure. It's the stuff that makes businesses competitive. I wish you could travel around the world with me. 600,000 miles so far, just since vice president. If I blindfolded Americans and took them into some of the airports or ports in China and then took them to one in any one of your cities in the middle of the night just so they could see it, and then said which one is an American, which one is in your city in America, and which one's in China, most Americans would say, well, that great one is in America. It's not. Look, historically, helping you on all of these issues and so many more has, in the past, not been a partisan issue. I served in the Congress longer than I like to admit, not because I'm not proud, because it reveals how old I am. Over the past 40 years, it's not been about whether we should do these things. It's been about how to do them. We used to debate on the means by which the aid would be provided, not if it should be. How to maintain crumbling infrastructure, water, sewer, ports, bridges, how to help you deal with the plight the most vulnerable Americans residing in your cities, how to keep your residential neighborhoods safe, give your schools a fighting chance, so much more. That was never in the past about if, it was about how. But as I said at the start, you all knew we had to act. You were calling me while we were talking about a Recovery Act. You in particular called me a hell of a lot. But all kidding aside, Democrats and Republican mayors and governors, county executives, were calling me because I'm the one that had the pleasure of dealing with you the most. So we acted. We gave relief. At the same time, we help you grow your economies and the economy of this country through the Recovery Act. About a third of which, I might add, went to tax relief. Tax relief for ordinary Americans and small businesses. And although we were vilified at the outset by our opponents, as the old saying goes, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And now, after its implementation, the vast majority of economists acknowledge the Recovery Act kept us from going off a cliff and saved or created at least 3,600,000 jobs. You notice people aren't debating that anymore. You can debate whether we could have done it better, whether a better way to create more jobs. I'm open to that debate. But not whether it had a significant impact. It gave you the assistance in many cases that will last. A lot of that money in there was infrastructure. Just ask the mayor of Orlando about a little transportation impact he had in his city, helping you deal with some of your most dangerous infrastructure problems. So some of it was completely temporary, but some of it had lasting impact. Although I knew a lot of you before the act, I really got to know an awful lot more of you and got to know you pretty well. I had the responsibility, as you know, he never told me about it ahead of time, but I had the responsibility of implementing that little program and ensuring that there was as little waste and fraud as possible as any program. And by the way, independent studies have now demonstrated, and the Republicans in the House have acknowledged, because we're trying to do it government-wide, that there was less than a fraction of 1% of waste or fraud in the whole operation. And it was a multi-billion-dollar operation. And it didn't happen because of me. It happened because of you. I'm not being solicitous. That's the God's truth. How many times on the phone with you guys I'd say, look, don't tell me you're going to do a water park. Don't tell me you're going to have a Frisbee park. Don't give me that. Tell me what you're... And you guys did it. And you guys accounted for the money. Republicans and Democrats. You made this initiative work. As I said in the process, I got to speak to 117 of you, every single governor but one, multiple times, and not just for a few minutes, for a half hour, 45 minutes at a shot. And I hope I listened to you. You gave me concrete, specific recommendations. And I hope I can say without fear of much contradiction that I listened to you and in most cases implemented what you wanted. The one place we agreed, we should have had a lot of this money go directly to cities, in my view, and not.
All right. There you go.
Antonio, as you know, that's what I did when I wrote the crime bill. It wasn't against states. States could apply directly too. But you should have had more direct input. But look, one of the reasons I came today is I particularly want to thank, I'll not embarrass any of you by mentioning you, but I particularly want to thank the Republican mayors here. I'm not being a wise guy, I'm being deadly earnest. And an awful lot of Republican governors and county executives who helped as well. I know you guys and women were under significant pressure, but you put aside partisanship, and we acted together. That's how we used to do it for most of my career. Argue like hell, but ultimately work together. We got to get back to that, I might add, parenthetically. But all this takes me back to a conversation, a new conversation, picking up where we left off. And one of my messages is, we've got to get both parties in Congress to pay closer attention to your needs. You cannot have a healthy country without healthy, thriving cities. It is not possible for that to happen. And we've got to make sure they understand better. We worked successfully. We worked successfully the first couple of years making our case to the Congress. Democratic mayors, Republican mayors, everybody. FMAP, caring for the poorest among us, should not be a uniquely state or municipal responsibility. It's a national responsibility. That's why we put over $100 billion in so-called FMAP, Funding the Recovery Act. You needed it. If anyone doubts it, ask Mayor Nutter about what it meant to Philadelphia. What would have happened had it not gone to the state? He can tell you, like all of you mayors could tell anybody listening, that like in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, if they hadn't gotten the help, his hospitals would have been overrun. He would have been unable to deal with what would have become literally a health crisis in his city, affecting thousands of women and children and men. The Recovery Act, we fought to keep the COPS program alive, allowing you to retain shields. We gave you flexibility to allow you to retain firefighters. If you got caught in the middle of a perfect storm, this economy didn't help your crime situation, your arson situation in your cities. Just ask Mayor Menino. He was able to keep 50 cops on the beat to continue the proactive policing that he's made famous in his city. Recovery Act helped him do that. Mayor Swearingen, Fresno. Ashley, you and I spent a lot of time, I don't know where you are or whether you're even here, but you and I spent a lot of time on the phone. You were able to hire 41 cops. Wherever you are, Ashley, thank you. I guess I just have embarrassed you. But you also were able to keep 16, bring back 16 laid off, because she has a real problem, like a lot of you do, with gangs and drug dealers. It made a difference in her city. We had $100 million, $1 billion in money in the Recovery Act for education. Arnie Duncan either has or going to talk to you all again. Together, we kept 400,000 educators on the job nationwide. It made an impact in our cities. When people tell me it doesn't matter and they talk about teachers, look, we can argue all day about teachers and more responsibility, less responsibility, et cetera, et cetera. Legitimate debate, and you know, we're engaged in it, and we're not always, our positions aren't always warmly embraced by our friends in the unions. But the point is, it misses the point. You take teachers out of classrooms, you reduce class size, reduce teachers, you dramatically increase class size. I love these guys. Try teaching. I love these guys who say, oh, it's just as easy to teach 50 as it is 20. Yo, Richie, where the heck have you been? Try it. Some of you have been teachers. Hell, I had enough problem teaching an advanced course in constitutional law at law school with 12 in a seminar. But all kidding aside, I saw firsthand throughout the country the impact of being able to keep teachers in the job. I was down in Land O'Lakes, not far from here in Pasco County last fall. I met with the teachers, students, parents. Although they had to lay off 5% of their staff, they were able to keep 200 teachers who otherwise would have been lost. Same thing when I went to York, Pennsylvania, Grand Rapids, Michigan. I could take you all across the country in your cities. Folks, there's so much more we can do right now. We don't have to wait for the grand bargain, which we need. There's so much we could do right now that up to now has never been a partisan problem. The American Jobs Act. The President asked for my input putting that together. I deliberately, Joe, put in things that I thought from my experience, because I've been at this for a long time, things that Republicans in the Congress historically have liked, always supported. Things have been bipartisan. It had cops and firefighters, school modernization. Average school in America is 40 years old. Independent experts said, not us, we didn't put a number on it. We've gotten smarter. Independent experts said it would create 2 million jobs over several years. Once again, the majority of the House stood up and blocked it. Look, certain things are absolutely clear. And I don't understand why our friends in Congress don't get it. In our cities, neighborhoods have been decimated by foreclosures, abandoned homes, schools in trouble, shuttered storefronts, increased public safety needs, middle-class homeowners trying to figure a way out, desperate for relief. And in Congress now, we could give more. I'll give you a couple of examples. We have a proposal, nothing earth-shaking about it. Won't cost the taxpayers a single penny. There are 14 million homeowners in America that have never missed a mortgage payment. 14 million who are paying an interest rate between 6 and some 7 and higher % on their mortgages. Mortgage rates are around 4% now all across America. If they're able to refinance, on average, they save $3,000 a year. The neighborhoods I grew up in, $3,000 matters. It means whether you can pay your automobile insurance. Can you get your house insurance paid? Are you able to keep your kid in community college? It matters. $3,000 matters in my neighborhood. And here's what we proposed. Only those banks that have $50 billion in assets or more would literally pay pennies on $100 for a fund that would be set aside, a reinsurance fund in a sense, of $9 billion, most of which would never be even dipped into, to reassure all your local banks or allow those 14 million people who have mortgages to go in and refinance their homes, which they can't now. Why? Because through no fault of their own, some of them are upside down. They've seen the equity in their home drop. They have a job. They've never missed a payment. And the small banks say, I can't take the chance. It would guarantee overnight. That's real money into the economy. But once again, Congress is sitting on their hands. Immediate infrastructure needs. Surface Transportation Act. Just do that. Just do that. 2 million jobs. I mean, man. If I sound frustrated, it's because I am. We proposed a way beyond that to revitalize roads, ports, railroads, all needed to maintain and attract businesses and city dwellers, to increase American business productivity. Like I said, just ask Mayor Dyer here in Orlando what he's been doing with a little bit of help he got on infrastructure and transportation. But again, majority of the House sitting on their hands, refusing to act. Look, folks, the few things I've just laid out are not going to solve the greatest recession in the history of the American Republic. But I tell you what, man, I suspect you're like me. This is about one citizen at a time, man. We can talk in the abstract, and we have plans to do that, how to cut the deficit by $4 trillion, et cetera, all those things. Not even talking about that. When you can act now to save a single person, when you can act now to save the circumstances of millions of Americans, because each of these jobs, most cases, there's a family attached to the job. We have no excuse not to do it unless there's some fundamental philosophic disagreement as to whether or not it's legal, constitutional, or efficacious. Look, we need Congress to stand up. We can't wait. We can't wait. I know Secretary Donovan, for example, has talked to you, some of you yesterday. He asked you all to hold roundtables so folks in your community can know about the plans we've already put in place that don't need Congress's help to help them refinance. And talk to them about how we could refinance. Talk to your local bankers. Ask them if they're opposed to the proposal we have that will allow them to refinance. I think it's a great idea because right now, people should know what's at stake in Congress. Now look, I know the usual conflict. There's always a conflict, competition among, not partisan, Congress, local officials, White House, Congress, et cetera. And a lot of the guys didn't like the fact that they were going out and getting beat up for borrowing money and giving it to states, and then finding out some of the guys in the states were taking the money and then saying those Democrats up there are out there wasting your money. I get it. But I also say to them, get over it. Get over it. Because ultimately people judge us by the results. by the results of what we do. So I hope those of you who are Republican will let your Republican colleagues up in the House know some of this shouldn't be partisan. We're willing to compromise. Again, we put together these immediate job bills thinking that this is what would attract help. Look, we're all about, and I believe in their heart, everybody in this business is about the national need. You're about the needs of the cities. Obviously, we've made up of different parties, and this is an election year. Believe me, I understand it. Regardless of which party you belong to, I think all of us in this room understand there are certain things that are bigger than the party. And I'm not giving one of these, speeches that you win the oratorical contest on. Simple. There are just certain things that are bigger than party. And right now, certain things have historically been bipartisan. Things we've always done together. The very things we could do some of right now. So I urge you, contact your friends in Congress. Tell them, just for a little bit, you don't have to do it all, just put aside this obstructionism. Pick a couple of these things. Just create, give some relief. And we can do it between now and November. We don't have to wait. We have to move now. Because if we move now, we can help millions of people continue to pull themselves out of the god-awful situation they find themselves in. And in the process, it all adds to a recovery that is painful but consistent, moving. Much more has to be done. And we can all fight later over about who takes credit or blame. But right now, I don't know anybody who sat around my dad's table, his brothers and sisters, my mom's brothers, our neighbors. Whenever there was a recession, everybody knew someone around that table was going to lose their job. I didn't hear a whole lot of talk about whose fault it was. I didn't hear a whole lot of talk about the GDP. And my dad was a really smart guy. What I heard about was things are looking better, Joe, because they're building a new food fair in the corner here in Philadelphia Pike and Claymont. My dad never worked at a food fair. My dad never wore a blue collar. LeBrock makes me sound like I just climbed out of a mine in Scranton, Pennsylvania, carrying a lunch bucket. No one in my family worked in a factory. But like most middle-class people, they struggled. So my dad, I'll never forget, I was in fourth grade, sitting at the table in Claymont, Delaware. And I remember having a discussion with his brother and just said, it's getting better, Frank. They're building a food fair down there. They're going to employ 100 and some people permanently, and they're going to hire X number of people to build it. It had nothing to do with working there. It had to do with things were moving. I started off, and I'll end with saying not only did this Great Recession, do real economic damage, it did psychological damage to the country. Americans who have been badly hurt, many through no fault of their own, they've got to have some hope. We've got to give them hope. We're going to recover. We're better positioned than any nation in the world to lead the 21st century economically. It is inevitable. But in the meantime, if you're in the short end of this, it seems like forever. We have an obligation to those people. That's why you're mayors. That's why you got in it. That's why I'm in it. And there's something we can do about it. So let's act. God bless you. May God protect our troops. Thank you.